name is Chris from ChristopherHall.com, and welcome to this video where we're going to be talking about low carb diets and carbohydrates in general. That's where we're going to start. We're going to build some pieces, and then we're going to talk about the low carb diets and hopefully give you a little bit more of an insight into what they are and I guess sort of how they work. Before that, quickly just mention I've got my social media channels. If you want to come to Twitter, it's at Christopher Hall. Come to Facebook, it's Christopher Hall Training, and Instagram, it's Christopher Hall. It'd be great to see you there, hear from you there, answer any questions that you may have. Alternatively, you can come to the website. You can join our free monthly newsletter, which is christopherhall.com/join, and you can get loads of information on health and fitness. We try and cover as many subjects as we can in the sort of realms of exercise, nutrition, and mindset around being healthy. So if you want to come along, it'd be great to have you there. If you have any questions or anything like that, just pop them in the comments box below, and maybe I can answer them there, or I could create a fresh video based on that question. So back to today's video, where we're talking about low carb diets. First of all, we've got carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates are basically sugars, if you want to call them that. Now, we've got three types, or there are three types here anyway. You've got monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Now, obviously, mono meaning one, di meaning two, and poly meaning many, as you can see here. Now, the monosaccharides, they are generally what are known as your simple sugars. So they're found in fruits, sweet drinks, and other sort of sweet foods, if you will. Then you've got your disaccharides, where you've got sucrose and you've got lactose. Now, lactose is the milk sugar. So with disaccharides, you've got two of these single molecules stuck together to create a disaccharide. So two sugar molecules essentially is what is being described there. And then here you've got many. So each one of these is a sugar molecule stuck together, and these are known as slow release. So these would be more quick release, and these would be more slow release. So it's very much understanding the different types of carbohydrates that can be consumed. Now, obviously, the most advantageous ones are sort of whole foods that are polysaccharides. So things like, obviously, lentils. You've then got brown rice, brown bread, sweet potatoes, so on and so forth. So all those types of foods are slow release polysaccharides, if you will, or slow release carbohydrates, if you want to call them that. Oats is another one, porridge oats, and things like that. So those are the most advantageous ones to eat. The least advantageous are the monosaccharides in the form of sweet drinks, sweet foods. There is a better option, which are your fruits. So your fruits like apples, oranges, pears, plums, peaches, all those types of foods, apricots, so on and so forth. But again, it's just managing how much you eat, because it is a simple sugar. So that's, I guess, sort of a very brief introduction to carbohydrates. So when our body is starting to process them, this is where it comes into digestion. So we're going to sort of build into the diet, if you will, or build into talking about it anyway. So digestion occurs in the mouth, the stomach, and the intestines. Now, if you're eating a polysaccharide, your body has to do more in the mouth, in the stomach, and in the intestines to break all this down so it can use it. If you're taking in a lot of monosaccharides, then it doesn't have to do that. You don't have to do a lot in the mouth, the stomach, and the intestines. They just get released into the system. They flood the system. Your body then releases a lot of insulin to try and remove that from the bloodstream. So the most advantageous ones to take in are your polysaccharides. So your whole food polysaccharide, that is. So what then happens is they get stored either in the liver, the muscle, or the bloodstream. So what this means is your bloodstream requires a certain amount of blood sugar, or blood glucose as it's called. Now, when it's got sufficient amounts, it will start to store it in the muscle. And then when your muscle's got sufficient amounts, it will start to store it in the liver. Now, if you put too much in your body, so if you start loading up on any of these, then it's going to then start putting it in, or convert it into triglycerides and put it in the fatty tissues. So what we've got to understand is that too many carbohydrates are the ones that are getting stored in the fatty tissues. So that's kind of, I guess, like the first bit. So we aren't necessarily talking low carb diet. We're talking about the right amount of carbs diet, or that's what I talk about anyway. A lot of people come and ask me about, should I be on a low carb diet? And where it does have certain advantages, if you are, let's, I guess, sort of say your blood sugar is starting to go into the hyperglycemic range, then there is cause for reducing the amount of carbohydrates in your diet. But generally, it will be these mono and disaccharides rather than the polysaccharides. You'd be more, you'd gain more from taking these out than you would taking these out and leaving the monosaccharides in, if that makes sense. So when we're talking about a low carb diet now, is when we're restricting carbohydrates by a lot, let's just say 80% of your norm, what you're going to find is, because you haven't got as many carbohydrates going in, your body's going to be using up more carbohydrates and releasing them. Now, what comes along with glucose molecules is water. So you might get 3 to 4 times the amount of water than there is one molecule. So what happens is, as these molecules get consumed, you take 3 to 4 times water with it. So as you start reducing, you'll get a big weight loss at the start. That's generally water weight, based on that idea that you get water that comes along with a lot of the glucose molecules. So what we have to understand is the initial weight loss is water, because you've restricted the amount of carbohydrates. Now, the biggest downfall with low carb diets is when you start eating normal amounts of carbohydrates again, because what will happen is all that water weight will go back on again. So you'll see, it will seem like you've put on a lot of weight. So it's not always that advantageous to have low carb diets, because when you start bringing the carbs back in, you put the weight back on. But it's not necessarily fat weight, it's normally water weight, because that's the weight you lost, and so therefore that's the weight you gain back on. So it's very much understanding that what we really need to be doing is reducing all macronutrients, so proteins, carbs and fats, which is essentially another way of saying reducing your calorie intake, or reducing the amount of food that you take in. Because what happens with fats is, if you eat excessive amounts of them, they get stored just the same as carbohydrates. So if we stop taking them in, if we eat less of them, the same as the carbohydrates, then we don't need to store them in the bloodstream, in the fatty tissue, sorry. The only difference being, with excess of protein, that gets excreted. So that gets excreted from the body. There's not necessarily big stores of protein. There are small ones, but they aren't used necessarily for muscle tissue. That's more just as a whole body backup, if you will. So what we are trying to understand from this video is that low carb diets aren't as advantageous as they may seem to start with, because of the initial coming off the carbohydrates, loses water weight, and going back on it. What we can find advantageous is if you are slightly moving into the hyperglycemic range of blood glucose, then reducing the amount of monosaccharides and disaccharides in your diet is going to be advantageous, which again is going to help with calorie intake and body fat gain and loss. So as we come to the end of this, I'll just quickly summarize or conclude what we've discussed. The first thing is we need to eat less of all nutrients, so eat less food essentially. That will allow our body to remove more of the fatty tissue than just stuff from the blood or stuff from the liver or stuff from the muscle. We need to eat less processed food, because processed food notoriously has the monosaccharides, which are the least advantageous. We need to eat more whole foods, because that has the more advantageous carbohydrates in them. And the fourth thing, which I haven't talked about, but I do want to conclude on it, is to write down what you eat. Because I get many people talk to me about what they're doing and what they're trying to do, but I've got no means of trying or better understanding it, because nothing's written down. So if I can't understand it, there's a good chance that they aren't going to understand it. But if you're writing down what you eat, you can see, well, I'm eating 80% carbohydrates and 10% fat and 10% protein. Well, that does mean reducing the amount of carbohydrates and increasing the amounts of fats and proteins. So it's a way of understanding of how to rebalance and recalibrate your diet. Not necessarily just going, I'm just no longer going to eat carbohydrates. Because they do have uses in the body, it's just too much of them is not advantageous, because it makes your insulin spike, plus if you eat too many of them, it gets converted to fat and then gets put in the fatty tissue. So Those 4 things: eat less of all nutrients, eat less processed food, eat more whole foods, and write down what you eat. That will help you gain a better understanding of what you're eating. It'll help you gain a better understanding of what you need to do in order to maintain your weight more effectively. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from ChristopherHall.com. I'll speak to you in a future video.